Hello. Welcome back to Wednesday Word. Thank you so much for joining me as we are drawing to a close in our study of the patriarchs Isaac and Jacob. And for the last several weeks, we've been focused on Jacob, the trials and the blessings of his life, the ups and downs. And when we were together last time, Joseph had been basically told that his father was not doing well. Look, he's sick, he's older, things are not so good. So Joseph had brought his two sons to Jacob with the intention and purpose of having Jacob bless these sons that had been born to Joseph while he was in Egypt. Now, when Jacob learned that Joseph was coming to see him, it was like the old patriarch rallied. He scoots himself up in bed and prepares to receive this son that he has always loved. An over-the-top love and devotion to this man. And so Jacob tells some, I guess you would call them stories, or shares some recollections about his experience when God visited him in Luz, how the covenant promises made originally to Abraham had been repeated and renewed in him, having passed from Abraham to Isaac down to Jacob. The way God promised to multiply his descendants, make him a great nation, and give those descendants the land of Canaan for an inheritance. Jacob did an unusual thing. He went on to basically claim the two sons of Joseph as his own sons. He put Manasseh and Ephraim on the level of Issachar and Dan and Judah in terms of belonging to him and inheriting through him. Now, here's what's interesting. In doing that, it was as if he legally adopted them, but he guaranteed that Joseph would have a double portion of the land in Canaan, and that these two sons would both end up not necessarily being half tribes like we call them, but being a tribe of people in and of themselves. Though, as we're going to see, Ephraim was always more prolific, more the leadership dominant tribe. Okay, that takes us back to our text. And as we move toward conclusion, we are in Genesis 48, verses 8 through 16. And it reads, "Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, 'Who are these?' Joseph said to his father, 'They are my sons, whom God has given me in this place.' And he said, 'Please bring them to me, and I will bless them.' Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them near, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, 'I had not thought to see your face, but in fact God has also shown me your offspring.' So Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim on his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. Then Israel stretched out his hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger." Now, I skipped an important word. Not the hand we expect. He stretched out his right hand, the symbol of power and strength, and placed it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all the days of my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads." Did you notice the text said that he blessed Joseph? But clearly the words are spoken over Ephraim and Manasseh. Bless the lads. Let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now, did you notice Jacob asked the identity of Joseph's two sons? By the way, they are not lads, babies, toddlers, even teenagers. How do we know that? Because Jacob has been in Egypt 17 years. These young men were born before Jacob came to Egypt. So how old are they? Somewhere in their 20s would be my guess. So not babies at all. We should not in any way conclude that Jacob doesn't recognize them because he's never seen them before. He's been there a long time, reunited with his beloved son. No doubt these young men have been introduced to Jacob before. However, his eyesight is dim, and I believe what we're supposed to conclude is that he does not recognize them because he can't see well enough to do that. The imagery that they came from beside Joseph's knees is not a suggestion of how tall they were, how old they were, but of the fact that they were in close proximity to him and beside him. So as we hear the old patriarch, he expresses his absolute gratitude that he not only saw the son that he didn't think he would ever see again, but he was allowed to see and enjoy the grandchildren that had been born to that son for him. So Joseph brings these young men close to Jacob, and Joseph himself bows before his father. Now, this is a man of power, a man of authority, but showing deference and respect to his father, the old patriarch, the head of the family, no doubt about that still. There's a lesson in respect there that I think we would do well to learn today. There's not as much respect shown to elders, to people who are in authority, as I think is appropriate sometimes. Okay, so Jacob, these young men are brought near him. Ephraim is on his father's right side on purpose, so he'll be on, Ephraim's on his father's left side, so on purpose he'll be on his grandfather's right side. Manasseh is on his father's left side, so on purpose he will be in line to have the right hand of Jacob placed on him. Now, totally knowing what he's doing, Jacob crosses his hands so that he places the hand of primary blessing on the younger son, Manasseh. Now, he spoke these words of blessing supposedly to Joseph, but actually bypassing Joseph and placing these words of blessing, as I have already said, on the sons that had been born to Joseph. Did you notice that he blesses them and he uses 3 titles or references to God to do that? And that's really important because he is acknowledging God's role in the goodness and the good things that have come to him. He's showing a worshipful, respectful attitude toward God. He calls him titles that we would have heard before: the God of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac. He calls him the God who fed him all his life, and the language suggests that God shepherded him. He calls him the angel who delivered him or redeemed him from evil. Now, that's like referring to the angel that appeared to Hagar when she was desperate in the wilderness place, or the appearance to Abraham when the warning came that Sodom was going to be destroyed. Certainly no ordinary angel is being referenced there. So with the use of those titles, Jacob acknowledged the ancestral connection, God of Abraham and Isaac, the personal connection, the one that shepherded me, fed me, kept me, has been so good to me, and the redemptive aspect of God, the one who redeemed or delivered him from evil. What an awesome, intuitive acknowledgement of the nature of God and the goodness of God in Jacob's life. Now, he blessed Joseph, a blessing that would be carried out through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh, grandsons who would actually carry Jacob's name as if they were sons, and who would become a great multitude, like full tribes in their own right, even though they're called half-tribes. Okay, back to our text, Genesis 18:17 through 22. Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Interesting, coming from a man who was second-born himself. But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a great people, and he also shall be great. But truly, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am dying, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers," a double portion of land inheritance in Canaan. He did that by dividing the tribe of Joseph, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. Now, Joseph tries to correct his father. That does not work at all. Jacob will not have any of that. He's not going to allow it. He knows what he's doing. It's deliberate. It was not a mistake. It was not because his eyesight was poor. He blessed Ephraim above his brother Manasseh, even though Joseph is assured by Jacob that Manasseh will also become a great people. He goes on, Jacob does, to indicate that in the future, Israelites will actually indicate a blessing statement that will be common. In other words, they're going to say, when they want to bless someone, "May God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh," holding those two young men and the tribes they would become up as being enviable. So it would become a way to bless someone else. But even in that, Ephraim is listed before his brother. Jacob indicates that he's going to die soon, but that he knows God will bring his descendants out of Egypt and back to Canaan, the land of the patriarchs and the forefathers of Joseph. Now, Jacob tells him point blank, "I gave you a double portion, twice as much of an inheritance in the land of Canaan as your brothers will receive." Land that passed to Joseph was land that Jacob had actually conquered himself. So it would be land that Ephraim and Manasseh would be able to, well, part of it, they would be able to claim that Jacob had taken himself. And I want to remind you that when Jesus went to Samaria and rested by the well of Jacob, Sychar was nearby. He actually was in the place where Jacob had conquered the land that had been passed to Joseph indirectly by giving it to his son. Now remember, we had one son settle on the east side of the Jordan and one settle on the west side. So that's a little different too. So, okay, because Jacob knows he's about to die, as we go into Genesis 49, Jacob has called all his sons. Now it's not just interaction between him and Joseph. He has called them together so that he could speak over them one final time. It would be the equivalent of the blessing that he would give, but a lot of it is not going to sound like a blessing at all. Some of it almost sounds like a curse, but it's all prophetic. Even as I say that, I want to make it clear that the words that Jacob spoke over his sons did not make those men make choices or did not determine the character of those men. They had the power to change some outcomes by changing their hearts and the way they lived. That is always true. God does not make us sin. There's no sin in His character. He cannot do that. He does not tempt us to sin. We make choices and then consequences result from those choices. Okay, into Genesis 49 now, looking at the first 12 verses, because we're going to deal here with the first 4 sons of Leah in particular, and then a little bit beyond. Okay, and Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days," speaking prophetically. Now notice that term, last days. That's an interesting term, not used exactly the same way we use it prophetically today. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. He's lumping them together. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, remember that line, and scatter them in Israel. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down. He lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Okay, Jacob is dying soon. He knows his time is short. I do think sometimes people know when their time is short on this earth, even if it's not some doctor's diagnosis or some physical illness that's winding down. He calls all of his sons to him. He prophesies over them regarding not just their lives, but what lay ahead of their descendants in the future, in accordance with what God is revealing to him. So he speaks a prophetic mixture of blessing and cursing. Now we have to understand, as I've already said, that wasn't in stone. We continue to make choices. God may know what we're going to choose, but he doesn't make us choose it. Jacob spoke in authority. He spoke in faith. They would see what he had spoken come to pass, and what he speaks is going to affect many generations to come. Now we know the best blessings are reserved for Judah and for Joseph and for their descendants, because they were to become dominant tribes in Israel. Judah in the south, and Ephraim and Manasseh in the northern kingdom, after the kingdom divided. Now, it's very typical what we hear here in terms of a Semite's blessing when he knows he's dying. There's a collective essence to what he says, and let me explain that. He's not just talking to 12 sons. He's talking about generations out in the future. And he's speaking to these sons, but the application will not stop there. He begins in verse 3 by addressing his firstborn, Reuben, the son that Leah gave him, the first son born. He should have been entitled to the blessings of the firstborn, to rule his brothers, to get a double portion of the goods that would pass, the land that would pass, to serve as head of the family, to have a priestly function. That should have been Reuben's role. But that couldn't happen. Jacob is, in his mind's eye, focused on the character of Reuben, and it is lacking. We know what happened. He defiled his father's bed. He slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, who was the maid of Rachel. And when he did that, he sacrificed the favored position he should have held as the inheritor of the firstborn blessing. His priestly role was going to pass to Levi. His kingly right to rule and be the head of the tribes of Israel was going to go to Judah. His inheritance of a double portion of the land of Canaan was going to the descendants of Joseph. He was going to be left with none of the firstborn rights. Though a symbol of, a recipient of the dignity, the honor associated with firstborn rights, the natural gifts and talents that should have been bestowed on him and accompanied those rights, would all be forfeited. Any position of power, any ability to hold strong influence, was all sacrificed because of the instability of his character. You know, the word makes it clear, and it's very true, that even if you're gifted, it will only take you so far, because God's anointing, God's favor resting on you, your obedience as you walk in those things is and always has been key to remaining in the position and the will of God and accomplishing what He has planned for us. So Jacob expresses the character flaws, the immorality of his son by calling him unstable and stating that he will not excel. What he's saying is, Reuben, your uncontrolled passions, and he uses Hebrew terminology to basically say those passions are like water that has no restraint and is being poured down in a bubbling and foaming torrent. Your unbridled passions were your undoing, Reuben. So by your immorality you have forfeited what should have been yours. No leadership position, no place of prominence, no larger inheritance. It's all gone, Reuben. Reuben's descendants would become a pastoral people, shepherds, who settled on the eastern side of Jordan where there were pastures for their flocks. We see that recorded in Numbers 32, verses 1 through 33. There was a high price for sensual pleasure in Reuben's life. Wow, that's sad. Jacob addresses Simeon and Levi together. They were the second and third sons of Leah. He considered them two of a kind and he lumped them together. Now, if Reuben wasn't qualified for the firstborn blessing, Simeon and then Levi in that order should have been entitled to that blessing. But guess what? They didn't get it either. And it's because of their extreme anger that was unbridled, demonstrated itself in cruelty, and the old patriarch has never forgotten that. Their cruelty is a character flaw because it reveals their inhumane, mean-spirited tendencies. It's almost like to some degree that Jacob fears their cruelty and their anger. He uses their harsh and cruel murder of Shechem as an example of the demonstration of their anger, their tendency to violence and cruelty. And he basically says, because of your character flaws, it's necessary for you to be separated in Canaan and divided in Israel. And here's the interesting thing. Every bit of that came true. They did not really have territory that they could call their own. Well, what do you mean? Let me explain. Okay, first of all, later when Moses blessed the tribes at the end of his life, he didn't include a blessing for Simeon. I remind you that tradition says Simeon was the more cruel of the two. But the descendants of Simeon basically were absorbed by the tribe of Judah. They basically they had this little small area inside Judah's territory. And later there was really no strong distinction between the two. They were swallowed up by Judah. Now, the Levites were the first to return to God after the debacle with the golden calf. For that reason, they did rise to prominence among the children of Israel, performing the priestly services. That's in Numbers 3, 12 and 13 and verse 41. They did not, however, inherit a section of land in Canaan. If you recall, they got certain cities where they would dwell, but because they performed the function of the sanctuary and served by rotations, they never really had a territory of their own. So Simeon absorbed by Judah, Levi a few cities, but no real territory. And the Old Testament history of the Levites is a mixed bag. Sometimes they served God faithfully and sometimes they didn't. Now, Judah is the fourth son of Leah. We know what happened to Reuben. We know what happened to Simeon and Levi. Judah's number 4. Now, after this point, the sons that are addressed are not going to be in order of birth. They're not. They're kind of mixed in. But Judah is an interesting listing here. It is the regular birth order, and I think this part was done that way so Jacob could justify why the first 3 didn't get the firstborn rights. Judah is also a son of Leah. He gets the first unqualified praise from Jacob. He was also granted the blessing of the firstborn in terms of rulership. Now remember, Levi ended up getting the priestly role. Judah didn't get that. He was, however, ultimately going to emerge as a leader who would be admired and praised. He would be the ruler over Israel and the nations. He would be the descendant of Jacob to whom his brothers would bow and give deference because his descendants would actually have authority over them. He would be feared by his enemies like a lion and would pursue those enemies until victory came. Then he would return to his mountain stronghold and rest in a secure place that enemies were not able to take from him. Peace, plenty, and prosperity would prevail in the land of Judah. Vines would flourish. Grapes would be abundant and plentiful, so much so that a conquering rider could fasten his horse or donkey or whatever he's riding, could fasten the reins to a large branch of a grapevine and enjoy the fruit right then and there. Wine would be so plentiful that men could wash their clothes in it. Judah's eyes, however, would not be red from wine. He would not be a sluggard and a drunkard. He would not be impacted by excessive drinking, but his eyes and the eyes of his descendants would be bright with prosperity. His teeth would be whiter than milk. His blessing is long. It is full of details. It is positive, and that's a first coming from the mouth of Jacob at this point in time. Now, we have to acknowledge that the royal line of rulers who came to sit on a throne in Israel in later times can be traced back to Judah, except for the beginning was not the tribe of Judah. You may remember that Saul, the first king of Israel, was of the tribe of Benjamin. But as soon as we see David anointed king, that royal lineage shifts to the tribe of Judah. All nations would be blessed through Judah. Well, we know that's true because Jesus Christ was going to be the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Don't you think it's interesting that he's called that when this reference to a lion is right there in the middle of Jacob's blessing? A strong warrior tribe, a tribe of strong rulers. So in his mastery, in his prophesied blessing and position, there was going to be those roles of warrior, king, judge, and Judah would fulfill those through his lineage. Wow. That lineage, there is a suggestion that there will not be a ruler missing from Judah until Shiloh comes. Now that's a really interesting statement, and it's one of the more enigmatic statements in the book of Genesis, and it's been interpreted a lot of ways. Now we know there was an actual city named Shiloh, and the tabernacle was set up there in Joshua 18:1. It clearly seems to be a proper name, or it could be a title. Most accept that it is some sort of messianic reference to Jesus Christ. Now, it's unclear exactly the derivation of the name, however. Some argue that it means the peaceful one. Others have a little grammar glitch that they use to say it means his son. tracing back to Judah, of course. And that would mean that lawgivers and princes would not disappear from Judah until his son came. Okay, I'm not offended by that in terms of lineage. But there's a third option, and it divides the word Shiloh into two parts. And there are a couple of expressions of that. If you have Shay and Lo, or She and Lo, there are two, yeah. And that suggestion is that it means the one to whom tribute is brought. So clearly, again, there's that idea of rulership. The ancient Jewish authorities argue that it means to whom it belongs, suggesting that it's the one to whom dominion belongs, the one to whom the kingdom belongs, the one who has the right to reign. Now, whichever of those exact interpretations you want to pick, all of them seem to lead straight to the conclusion that Shiloh here is a reference to Jesus Christ. And we know that Jesus would trace his lineage to the tribe of Judah. Now, verses 11 and 12 include some symbolic language that seem to suggest that Jacob is prophetically indicating that the rule of Messiah on this earth will be a time of paradise on earth. It will be a time when there is plenty, and there is peace, and there is vitality, and there's food, and there's health, and there is just bounty in the earth. It'll be a great time. People will have their fill of wine and milk. All shall be well. Sounds like the millennial reign of Christ to me. In any case, obviously Judah's blessing is outstanding in comparison to that of his brothers. Let's go back to our text, because Jacob has only addressed 4 of his 12 sons, beginning in Genesis 29, verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. I remind you that Sidon is a Phoenician city, as is Tyre. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between 2 burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. Gad, a troop, shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Now, in this section, we have the rest of the sons of Leah. We also have the sons of the 2 maid servants, not in birth order, mixed in. We do not have the sons of Rachel here. So he starts here with Zebulun, out of birth order, but another son of Leah. Basically, he indicates that Zebulun is going to enjoy a maritime position. He's going to be near the sea, a haven for ships, with the Phoenicians as near neighbors. That would be a place of a lot of commercial activity because of ships coming and going. There would be potential for prosperity there. We do know that the descendants of Zebulun were instrumental in the defeat of Sisera, a commander of a Canaanite army under King Jabin of Hazor. Maybe it's pronounced Jebin, whatever your preference is there. And this Hazor oppressed the Israelites, and we get the feeling here that Zebulun will know what that's like, but will not be bound there forever in all aspects of that word. The descendants of Issachar, son number 6 of Leah, again out of birth order, they were basically to be docile people. They're represented as a strong ox-like people who would accept a quiet life, who would end up in a more servant's role. Deuteronomy 33:18 indicates that. They were not high-spirited animals that would attract the attention of an observer, but rather more like powerful beasts who would take a burden and a yoke upon themselves without complaint. In their favor, they did have some political insight. They switched their allegiance from Saul to David. I'll give them that. We see that in 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 32. Dan, a son of Bilhah. Remember, we got Zilpah and Bilhah. Bilhah was Rachel's maid. And Dan became a rather small tribe. Notice he was described as a serpent by the way that could destroy a mighty cavalryman by nipping at the horse's heels and making the cavalryman fall backwards. Dan should have been a strong defender of his people. Unfortunately, in my opinion, he did not live up to the words of this blessing that suggest he could be a mighty warrior. I refer you to Judges 1:34. He seems to have had in latter days less interaction with the other tribes. I will say that Samson was a Danite. Certainly he was a powerful man. He was a great warrior. He probably was a type of what Dan should have become. Unfortunately, Dan, located in the extreme northern part of Israel, was the location of one of the golden calves. There were 2 that King Jeroboam set up after the kingdom was divided into the northern and southern kingdom. Remember, Jeroboam was afraid if the people went to Jerusalem to worship, they would stay there and wouldn't come home to his rulership. So he put a golden calf in Dan and one in Bethel down toward nearly on the southern border of the northern kingdom. Now, Dan was plagued with idolatry. If you trace them through Scripture, that's just a fact. The next son addressed is Gad. He was a son of Zilpah. He was a son of Leah's maid. There are some interesting plays on the word Gad in this verse, and these plays come from the Hebrew version of the word. Though in the English it's alliteration, it's troop, tramp, and triumph. And all of these words are used to suggest bravery, a warlike spirit, that they would be fighters, a spirit that could be a strong help to God's people in the land of Canaan. Later, the descendants of Gad, like a couple of other tribes, settled on the eastern side of Jordan, but they suffered there. The Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Amalekites never were totally routed, and there were attacks, and so that was a challenge. Asher, his name actually means happy. That's nice. He was also a son of Zilpah, who is Leah's maid, and he inherited in the land of Canaan a choice area on the coast that was north of Mount Carmel. Jacob pictures him as a fertile field where wheat, wine, and oil would be produced in plenty. It was near to Phoenician merchant cities, and they became a wealthy people, but they never kicked those Phoenicians out. We know that Joshua told the people to gradually expel the heathen people. He didn't want the wild animals or the barrenness of the land to actually work against them if there wasn't enough population there. But they were to eventually get rid of those people. They did not. And they did exactly what was prophesied. They became a snare to the people of God. Naphtali, who was the son of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, would be prosperous also as Asher would be, and would be a lover of freedom. His descendants settled in fertile northern areas and a mountainous area. That's in Joshua 27. But they never drove out the Canaanites either. At least they did get tribute from them, but still they did not fulfill exactly what they were to do. Okay, that takes us back to our text and the blessing of Jacob over the two sons of his beloved wife, Rachel. I'm in verse 22 of chapter 49. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. We hear a lot in these words. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. For there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the wombs, blessing of your father, have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. Wow, Joseph, the son of Rachel, the firstborn of Rachel, received the longest blessing in terms of wording and the highest praise of any of his brothers, including Judah. Joseph had demonstrated his potential as a visionary, a seer of dreams and visions. His moral and spiritual strength. How many references to strength did you hear in there? Remember, he could stand strong when being mistreated, when falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. He did the right thing, the God thing, the honorable thing. He demonstrated superior character, unlike the brothers who modeled their character flaws. He modeled unwavering loyalty to God, even in a strange and alien land. He's pictured as fruitful, so fruitful his branches go over the wall. He's pictured as hated, not just him, but his descendants would be. He's pictured as strong multiple times and in multiple ways of the terminology to express it. A leader among his brothers. His descendants would be leaders among the northern tribes of Israel. That's in 1 Kings 12:25 through 33. But unfortunately, they did not have his devotion and steadfast commitment to God. They were idolatrous. They participated in treasonous, alliances. That's in 2 Chronicles 25, verses 5 through 8, in Hosea chapter 4, verse 17. Some settled east of the Jordan, some settled west. I've talked about that. I will say that Gideon was of the lineage of Joseph. He was a strong man, but some of Joseph's descendants didn't live up to the level of his character. The titles for Yahweh that are included in Jacob's blessing of Joseph are interesting. And this time Joseph is not kind of bypassed so that Ephraim and Manasseh received the direct comments as the time when Joseph and his sons were alone with Jacob. The titles that are used, the shepherd, the stone of Israel, those are interesting choices for the Old Testament. Rare, in fact. Now, the God of your father, the Almighty, we've seen those references in the story of Jacob before. The blessings in verses 25 and 26 are very similar to what Moses said to the tribe of Joseph, to his descendants, the two half-tribes, when he blessed them in Deuteronomy 33 along with the other tribes when Simeon was missing. Now, Benjamin's blessing is positive. His descendants would be a spirited tribe. They would be like a wolf that chases its prey in the daytime and devours it and comes home at night satisfied because his needs have been met and he has what he needs. So it's a blessing. His descendants would be spirited like the description depicts them. Moses called them the beloved of the Lord. How sweet and precious is that in Deuteronomy 33:12. Now they did show some unrest under the leadership of David in 2 Samuel 20 verse 1, but they joined the southern kingdom when Israel divided. It was Judah and Benjamin. That's in 1 Kings 12:21. King Saul, as I've already mentioned, and the Apostle Paul were of the tribe of Benjamin. Verse 27 ends the prophetic comments of Jacob, and it basically indicates that he's addressed his 12 sons who would indeed become the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, my time is running away. Back to our text. This is Genesis 49, verse 29 through 33. Then he charged them, the 12 sons, and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Now, his final instructions are, don't bury me in Egypt. Interesting, but he's already had this conversation with Joseph, and I think he has it here to affirm to these other brothers that what he's told Joseph is indeed what he wants. And so when he finishes these instructions, take me back where all the patriarchs and their wives are buried, except for Rachel, who was buried near Bethlehem. He draws his feet up into the bed, and that actually means he was lying back down on what would be his deathbed, and he was gathered to his people, which basically says it. He died. He knew he was going. He shared these thoughts at the very end with his son and then with all 12 sons. He made sure that he spoke to each one. His instructions regarding his burial were made, and the man died. All right, Genesis 50, verses 1 through 6. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. Now when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am dying. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father as he made you swear." Joseph mourned his father. Those were tears of deep mourning. And then he commands the physicians, who are the embalmers, to prepare his father's body. Now, these embalmers were part of a secret profession in ancient Egypt, but they obviously knew their trade very well. Think about how many mummies still exist today after several thousand years. The embalming process was very lengthy. It took about 40 days. It actually took that long to do it. And it was the custom of the Egyptians to mourn important people for 70 days. And that happened for Jacob, not so much for Jacob as in honor of Joseph. And when that time of mourning was finished, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household. Now, isn't that interesting? Why did he speak to Pharaoh? There's probably a good reason. In all likelihood, Joseph has been in contact with a dead body and probably can't have access to Pharaoh. You know, there would have been beliefs about that with them as well. So he probably asked household members to intercede for him so that he could keep the promise he made to Jacob and do it with Pharaoh's blessing. Okay, back to the final text for this study. Chapter 50, beginning verse 7. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. Then they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father, and when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a deep mourning of the Egyptians." Therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. So his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. Now, we're talking a very impressive funeral procession that goes up to bury Jacob in the land of Canaan. The magnitude of the number of people involved, the chariots, the carts, the wagons, the people, the pomp and circumstance of the profession of Joseph's importance, because that's what they were doing. They were saying, hey, look, somebody really important is in this group. And in doing that, the honor that was bestowed on Jacob was an indication of the level of love and respect the Egyptians had for Joseph. They might not eat with him, but they honored him. Dignitaries, servants from Pharaoh's house, the household of Jacob in its entirety, other than the little ones and the flocks and herds. It would have been hard on the little ones, and they intended to come back. There's no sense in moving their possessions. The procession stopped at the threshing floor of Atad beyond the Jordan, and there was a 7-day mourning period there as well. Now, a threshing floor would have been a flat area, a good place to stop, but it's really not clear why they were there to begin with, because it would have been out of the way from their intended destination. We don't know. Some think that they thought there might be attacks and they took a detour that was safer because the Philistines were still very much there and very much a hostile threat. Whatever was the reason, they were there. And the local people were highly impressed by the level of mourning that was being shown. Jacob's sons did exactly what he made them promise to do. They buried him in the cave of Machpelah with his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham, and the wives, with the exception of Rachel, and his life was finished, and the era known as the era of the patriarchs was basically finished. We know that Genesis doesn't end there. The brothers of Joseph are scared to death he will punish them, which he assures them he will not. He's not God. He's not their judge. Joseph dies, and we know there's a promise attached to that. He didn't want to be buried in Egypt either. But even as Genesis ends, we hear the promise of God. You won't stay in Egypt forever. You'll be brought out into the land of Canaan. So many lessons for us to learn from the patriarchs. God's faithfulness despite their failures. God's long-range plan for his people, not just the Jews, but that the whole world would be blessed through the coming of Jesus Christ. I pray the study of the patriarchs has been a blessing to you, and that you will heed well some lessons learned and walk in obedience and faithfulness to the one that was promised to come, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, until we start a new study. God bless.